Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic. This is Battlefield 1. In today's weapon review, we're going to be taking a closer look at the Ribeyrolles 1918 Factory, the new SMG for the Assault class, introduced, of course, in the They Shall Not Pass DLC. We're not only going to be covering, of course, its base stats and how it compares, especially to the MP18, but also, of course, how to unlock this weapon if you want to use it on the battlefield. Before we then get into the performance of the weapon, the stats, and how best to use it on the battlefield, let's start off with the unlock requirements that you're going to have to fulfill. Now, these start counting from post DLC, post patch, so if you achieve these previously, it's not sadly going to count. Now you're going to need to get 50 kills with the Automatical Factory, which shouldn't be too much of a challenge. It's a relatively good weapon, and the more difficult part of this challenge is going to require you to get 20 headshot kills with the MP18 Optical. Now when I say headshot kills, sadly simply hitting your target in the head that you then eventually kill is not going to suffice. The bullet that actually takes them out is going to have to be a headshot, which is quite a nuisance, as I've said in previous videos, because it doesn't really make any sense. If you're trying to go for headshots, be that with any weapon at any distance, you're going to want to be at either your first or second shot that is actually the headshot because of the increased damage. When you've already got your target down to 10 health, there's no difference and there's no point in actually going for a headshot at this stage because you're more likely to miss. You're simply better off doing a body shot. Sadly, however, you're nevertheless going to have to complete this challenge if you want the weapon, so you better start searching for those camping snipers or get lucky in close quarter. With that being said, then let's start off with the stats of the weapon. The Ribeyrolles 1918 Factory comes with some typical SMG properties, as well as some different ones, some special ones if you so will. We've got a damage model here with a maximum damage of 23, a minimum damage of 15. Note here, this means a minimum bullet kill of 5, a maximum of 7, unlike most SMGs in the game, which will eventually arrive at 8 bullets to kill your target. It comes with a fire rate of 550 rounds per minute, of course identical to the MP18, which we will be drawing some comparisons to a little bit later in this video. The muzzle velocity at 520 meters obviously isn't great. It's an SMG, no secret there. The magazine here at 25 rounds is decent, given that you've got a low fire rate anyway. You don't burn through this magazine anywhere close to as fast as you would, for example, something on the Automatical. Nevertheless, you're not really going to be able to take out 5 targets with it, so reloading is going to have to be in order. Speaking then of reload times, they're relatively good. The short reload, that is with 1 or more bullets left, is at 2.1 seconds, capable of close quarter performance, of course. At 2.766 seconds, the longer reload is something you're going to want to try and avoid as per usual, but it's not going to get you killed, at least in most situations. Now the recoil on this weapon is interesting in that it's relatively high vertical recoil at 0.42 and relatively low horizontal recoil at 0.16. That is to say, the weapon, as long as you can deal with vertical recoil decently, is going to be relatively easy to control. This additionally comes, by the way, with a first shot recoil multiplier of 1.3, making tap firing and longer range target acquisition and maintaining that target while trying to shoot them relatively doable. I'd even verge on easy. Moving on then from its recoil to the accuracy stats of the weapon. Now, thankfully, this has a better ADS than most of your SMGs out there. That is to say, its base ADS, aiming down sight while standing still at 0.24, is reliable enough for you to hit the medium range targets that you're going to want to try and go for with this weapon. To somewhat balance this out, the weapon comes with slightly worse hip fire and ADS, so accuracy while moving values. That is to say, at 0.76, you're not going to be shooting your targets just as accurately when strafing when compared to something like the MP18 Trench, and your hip fire values at 2.25, that's hip firing while standing and moving, aren't going to be anything to write home about. Nevertheless, as you see in today's video, plentiful, sufficient for close quarter combat. Having then covered the stats, let's move on to where this weapon really fits in the SMG category and how to best use it on the battlefield. Now, this weapon is in an interesting place, and this is mainly not down to its own stats, but also down to the stats of the MP18, clearly its closest competitor, simply because of the damage output, which is of course very similar when coming out of this weapon. Now, the reason I mention the MP18 is because over the recent weeks and months of balances and weapon patches that we've gotten, the MP18 has increasingly but silently been getting buffs, which means it is now suddenly very competent at medium range, at least when comparing to the state it was at when the game first launched, which makes for an interesting comparison. Now, the Ribeyrolles has the advantage of requiring a bullet less at longer ranges. However, in most situations, this is an SMG, and despite its more long-range tendency among the SMG class, you're going to want to use it in close quarter to medium range, which gives it, however, a higher grade of flexibility than something like the Automatical, which is limited more to close quarter, maybe a little bit of medium range, but can't really compete with something like the Ribeyrolles at something like 30 to 40 meters. Now, the advantage that the Ribeyrolles has of the MP18, besides its higher minimum damage, which in my opinion isn't going to actually make that much of a difference in most practical situations, is a slightly better muzzle velocity and slightly better recoil model for longer range shooting. Now, hear me out when I say that it obviously has more vertical recoil, but it has less horizontal recoil, which is much harder to account for, and it has a lower first shot recoil multiplier, which is more important for the longer range targets and may allow you, and only time will tell if this is truly viable with this weapon, to even tap fire this weapon a little bit to get the most out of its weapon at long range. Now, is it an MP18 killer? Certainly not, because the MP18 has a number of other strengths and specializes, I'd argue, in a slightly more close quarter version of the medium range that the Ribeyrolles 1918 factory specializes in. Can I truly say this weapon is a completely overpowered, fantastic weapon? It's going to beat the Automatico for the most used SMG in Battlefield 1? Certainly not. Is it an incompetent or bad weapon that you should not try out? Certainly not. It's a very competent weapon. It's fun to use. It's good at both close quarter all the way out to medium range. And for those of you looking for a more flexible weapon who haven't recently tried out the MP18, I definitely recommend you try both the MP18 and the Ribeyrolles 1918. You can do quite a bit of work at medium range with this gun, which is refreshing because the assault class is of course usually limited to close quarter. As of how to use this weapon best, it's relatively obvious. Stick to its ideal engagement distance and play Battlefield the way it's supposed to. Get onto objectives, don't camp out long range, and you'll be just fine. The last point, of course, I wanted to note about this weapon, and we should not forget, is that it has a bipod, which makes, of course, recoil control a lot easier at longer ranges. Now, while deploying bipods personally isn't in my playstyle, and I can't make use of this feature too much because simply I find myself too vulnerable to sniper targets situationally, and of course in the right hands, this is going to give you a massive advantage at medium to long range over any of the other assault weapons out there, short maybe of course of the AT rocket gun, which is hilariously used of course very effectively against snipers at long range. With all that being said, let me know down below in the comments what you think of the Ribeyrolles 1918 factory, as well as your experiences so far with the weapons more generally in this DLC, as well as of course your usual video suggestions for Battlefield 1. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.